All right, Brian.
All right, former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates slamming the White House's foreign policy in many respects, saying it's the worst indictments of the president's leadership yet, as pretty much agreed upon because the respect that Gates has coming in. Joining us now, the man you're seeing, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, Senior Fellow with the London Center for Policy Research, fresh off an exclusive trip over to Egypt to give us an up-close and personal look at that. But in between us booking you, out comes excerpts from this book by former Secretary of Defense Gates, eminently qualified to comment about what's happening with the Obama administration. What sticks out with me is when he says there's a suspicion and distrust of senior military advisors by senior White House officials, including the president and vice president. What's the big deal?
Well, a huge deal. I was speaking to a former commander of Central Command who said during the time he was in command, if he had a problem with a policy the president put forth, he would call the Secretary of Defense, get on a plane and fly up and see the president the next day. I was told by this general, I won't mention who he was, he said that that access to the president by generals no longer exists. There is a complete disconnect between those who are leading the war and those who are making the decisions to embrace certain policies, which a lot of us predicted would never work in the beginning. You
know the stress and strife and the danger of war.
Absolutely.
Up close and personal. What is it like knowing now, if you're in Afghanistan and you're hearing this show, knowing that the president doesn't believe in the surge strategy that he put forth?
This is hugely disrespectful to the men and women who have not only given, all to go serve. People have died. Brian, I've been to Walter Reed. People have lost their limbs in this war. And those people are scarred for life. And it is an indictment to me to think that there is such a cavalier attitude about how we deploy forces globally. Or, in essence, then, knowing full well that they make political decisions on national security issues, knowing that people are going to die, and they really just don't care. And that's a sad, sad state of affairs.
You were against the war in Iraq.
I was.
But the surge worked.
It did.
And that was a place in Ramadi and Fallujah that was effective because the people of Iraq stood up and fought with us and took their country back.
Absolutely.
Was it irresponsible the way we left?
The decision to leave, Brian, was a political decision, not one based on strategy or the reality the intelligence was telling us. We knew that if we left, it would be like pulling control rods out of a nuclear reactor. It would go wild. That's what we're seeing here. We're seeing Al-Qaeda. And Fallujah, we lost a lot of blood and treasure. My Marine Corps brothers lost a lot of lives there. And it's sad to think that it was a decision based on a political narrative they wanted for the election, not based on what was best for the region. And now, as Tom Ridge said earlier, we have a real problem with that being a magnet, if you will, for Al-Qaeda to come in and do this.
Between the budget as well as Don't Ask, Don't Tell, these decisions were made without Gates and without Admiral Mullen, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That shows a breakdown in leadership and a distrust that backs up what Gates' assessment was. You just got back from Egypt. We know about the terrorists that are involved in the insurgency in Syria and in Iraq. How does it relate to the Muslim Brotherhood and what's happening in Egypt?
Well, I'm going to do a full debrief on the 29th of this month at the Union Union League Club. Information is on LondonCenter.org. And I'm going to talk about everything I saw. I met with the chief of their intelligence. And, Brian, it's bad. As much as I think we don't want to talk about the Muslim Brotherhood in a bad way, they are now becoming a terrorist organization. They've been designated by the Egyptians a terrorist organization. And they are doing everything they can to destabilize what right now looks to be a process of moving that whole nation to a democratic Republican system of government. They have elections mid-month.
You like where they're heading?
I do. They're doing a referendum on their new constitution. They're coming up with parliamentary and presidential elections over the next 6 months. They are going in the right direction. It's being disrupted by those Islamic extremists.
Now, as Americans, are we losing influence within Egypt, and is Russia gaining influence?
Oh, my goodness. That came up several times. And it is very clear that the Egyptian people are not upset with us, we Americans. They are upset with the policy. There's a great fascination, a shock, if you will, of this over-reliance on the Muslim Brotherhood, somehow thinking that they, as a quote-unquote moderate organization, which they are not, would somehow bring governance to Egypt. It's made it worse. And as a matter of fact, we'll see in the upcoming trial of President Morsi, he was conspiring with members of Hamas, of Al-Qaeda. He actually met with Ayman Zawahiri in Pakistan. Now, if that's not cavorting with the enemy, I don't know what is. So there's some real problems here with what's going on in our
By the way, that's the first time I'm hearing that. His brother was with Morsi, but I
Right.
did not know with Zawahiri himself.
I just learned this yesterday in a meeting.
That's the first time that's ever been public.
Yep. Well, there you go. So it's something that I think is very important to understand, that this was not a bunch of good guys trying to bring good governance to Egypt at the time they were doing
So
this.
Morsi might have won an election if you believe the results.
Right.
But he's meeting with our chief enemy, and that's Al-Qaeda's current leadership.
And the military had to pull him out because they could not meet the treaty obligations with the Israelis based on what they were told to do, what Congress told them to do, and they had to choose between Morsi and doing what they were asked to do to protect the Egyptian people.
Lieutenant, and there was millions in the street.
Right.
Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, thanks so much for coming out here with your exclusive report.
Hey, thank you.
All right.